I think when I was in academic research, I thought the only way to do research was to be in academia, that was a path that I didn't really want to pursue. I didn't want to get a PhD at that point. And I don't think I do at this point either. But it's just like, it's really cool. And I'm able to do the research that I want to do and make impact.
Hey, Nikki, thanks for joining us at the Life of a Career podcast. Could you provide us with a quick 90 seconds of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, and thanks for having me. My name is Nikki Fillingim, and I'm a user experience researcher at a large telecom company. Um, I have a background in psychology, and I've always been interested in how people work and how they interact with the world. And when I graduated from college, I was very ambivalent on what sort of career path to take. I was like a little bit lost, a little bit uncertain, but through a number of kind of interesting career pivots, I did find my way into UX. And that's the great thing about UX research is that there's no one perfect path to get into it. And that's something we'll also discuss during this interview as well. But I'm really happy I found this field, and I'm really happy to share how I got here and what I like about it. So yeah, thanks again for having me.
Yeah. Could you just quickly explain what is a UX researcher?
Absolutely. Excuse me. So a user experience researcher works closely with designers and product managers on things that either have been released to the public, as in people are interacting with it, or products that are soon to be released, like prototypes, things that aren't quite finished. And what we do is we work to identify the questions that the product managers and designers have about what they've created. Like, is it good? Is it user friendly? Is it intuitive? Do people like it? Do people drop off when they see the page? And we answer all of those questions through research. And we typically use like surveys, usability tests, click tests, a number of different methods to kind of get to the root of what we're trying to learn. And then once we have like gathered the research, we present those findings to the designers and product managers to improve their product.
Okay. So
Mhm.
it's really more software based then, right? So it's like interaction with a website or a phone app or something like that, correct? Like,
Yes, yes. That's the type of research that I do, but I think there are UX researchers who specialize in maybe physical things as well,
okay.
um, like phones and like how they fit in your hands, although that might be more ergonomics. But yeah, that's the primary sort of research that I do is like software and applications.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, what an interesting career field. I,
I
I
like
wonder how
it.
many people actually know that it exists. Probably the software development side.
Yeah, because it's like I didn't know about it like 3 or 4 years ago, but I always really enjoyed research because I have a pretty strong background in academic research. But I think when I was in academic research, I thought the only way to do research was to be in academia, that was a path that I didn't really want to pursue. I didn't want to get a PhD at that point. And I don't think I do at this point either. But it's just like it's really cool, and I'm able to do the research that I want to do and make impact.
Okay. I guess let's start from the very beginning then. Did you always want to be some sort of researcher then? UX research, I don't know even know if it existed when you were younger, because I'm sure it's kind of a pretty new field. But was that sort of the trajectory you were always looking to go towards research wise?
It's kind of funny because like not at all really. Because when I mean, I guess taking it back to the way beginning, when I graduated from high school, I really liked watching movies. So I was like, I should be a film major. And for my first year and a half of college, I studied film. And I was like, I like watching movies, but I don't know if I can make a career out of this. So I kind of, I guess, had a moment where I was like, what do I want to study in college and make the most of my last few years? And I've always been interested in like human behavior and like how the mind works. So I found psychology, and because of that curiosity, I was driven to volunteer to do work in different research labs while I was an undergrad. Um, two of which, because I was in two research labs, but I also worked as a statistics tutor because I found like my stride and I really enjoyed that. And yeah, so I was working in different research labs, and then that's when I kind of found out about research. Just kind of born on my own curiosity of like, how do people work, and how can I answer those questions that I have about human behavior and how the mind works. And then research was like the way to kind of answer those questions that I had. But yeah, when I was in college, like I'd never heard of UX research, which I should say too stands for user experience research. I don't know if I mentioned that before, but I'd never heard of it. But upon like doing research on UX research, I found that it's a field that's been around for about like 20 to 30 years, although it's like actually been around like even longer than that. But it was like in different departments and different sort of, I guess, forms at that point. But yeah, it's like that's kind of how I got into research of the academic kind, and then throughout my career, it's like I've kind of found this, and I'd be happy to share a little bit more about that as well. But that's kind of how I first got into research in general.
Okay. What made you want to go into the filming industry then? Was that something in high school that you were interested in? And when you were younger, what were the careers that were within your, level of awareness? Was it just being in entertainment and then maybe being a doctor, and then you just thought entertainment was the path to go?
Yeah, so I think at the time when I graduated from high school, I've I've always been like very introverted, and I even now I still am, but I think movies were like a really good escape for me, I guess, in a way, to kind of, because I think it's like I'm kind of like an introverted, anxious type person. So it's like movies were just a good escape for me. And I think at the time I was like, I just want to learn more about it, like what goes into like making movies. And I don't know at that time if I had a specific career focus at the time, but I did know I did go to undergrad at Georgia State, which is in Atlanta, and they had a film studies program. The Atlanta film industry was kind of booming at the time, and it still is a little bit. But I was like, maybe I could just figure it out once I get there and just start like making connections within like, the film industry through my classes. Um, but then I was just like, I remember there at Georgia State, there's like this student news station where students can like volunteer and like film things for like news segments. And I had the opportunity to get my hands on a camera, and I was like, I don't even like this. Because I was like, this is like, there's so much that goes into making a shot look good. And I was like, I don't really care about any of this. And it's like, obviously, I know there are other avenues within film you can go towards, but I was just like, I realized like how long it took to get a single shot kind of volunteering for that student news station. I was like, it takes forever to get a single shot down. It's just like everything takes too long. And I'm the type of person where I'm like, I want to get stuff done quickly. So at that point, I was just like, maybe film is just not for me. And that's okay.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. The how did you go from film to psychology then? What was that decision like?
That's a really good question. Because I think I am kind of like an introverted type person. And I think at that point, when I realized that film had a lot of things that I just wasn't interested in at all, I had a little bit of like a crisis moment because I was like, for this, for leading up to this point, this is what I've wanted, but now I've realized that this isn't what I want at all. And it was just kind of scary. So I was like, ooh, it was like a moment of like deep introspection of like, what do I actually enjoy? What interests me? What drives me, what makes me curious, what makes me want to learn more. And like I, discovered psychology, and it was like all of those things about like, it's like, why am I so introverted? I was able to kind of answer questions about myself through psychology and answer questions about other people in my life through psychology. So at that point, I was like, this is kind of where I should head into. And I'm glad I did.
Did you have any exposure to it as like an undergrad? The general electives, was psychology one of the classes you took that helped you make that decision while you were a film major?
It's funny. I did take an intro to psychology class, I think my second semester of freshman year, and I absolutely hated it. So I encourage people who are interested in psychology not to get discouraged by the intro class. But yeah, I was exposed to psychology that way. And I think I was really scared too because I didn't like that class so much. I was like, oh, if this is any indication of how the later classes are going to be, I'm kind of scared because I don't want to waste my time. But yeah, I ended up loving the other classes that I took in psychology, especially the more advanced classes. On like abnormal psychology and like interpersonal relationships. There was a class on human sexuality. So there were all of these like really fascinating classes that I took, and I'm glad I made that switch. Um,
So you really just took the leap,
I
even though you hated the.
Yeah, and I will say too is that my mom's best friend was is a psychiatrist, and I think throughout this transition, I was able to talk to her a lot about my feelings of ambiguity in this particular like transition period of my life, and she kind of helped me along the way, kind of validate that I was making the right decision. And that's where the importance of mentorship comes in, and I guess back to the mission of this project.
Yeah. And were there any other people in your life that sort of guided you in a certain path? Because of maybe this particular person helped you decide on the psychology path, but maybe there was someone else that might have helped you in another aspect. Um, or was mentorship sort of just accidentally bumped into, during this crisis and discovery process of yours?
I would say at that point in my life, it was kind of more of a coincidence that like my mom's best friend happened to be, a doctor and a psychiatrist. But other than that, I really didn't have access to any others that I can really think of. But now I have great mentors within UX research, but I think at that point I didn't have many. And especially with like I went to a really massive school like Georgia State. It's in the middle of downtown Atlanta and it has like 30,000 students. So it's like I felt like sometimes it was like tricky to identify those resources that could have helped me being at a large institution like that. But yeah, I guess I just got lucky with that connection though.
Yeah, I completely understand that. I think personally, I was
Mhm.
so independent minded in a way and stubborn that I never even thought to go find someone to advise me on my own career, you know?
Ooh.
So when I was younger, I just didn't even think. I think I knew that there were resources, but I was like, I know what I want to do.
Ooh.
And
So
then
you've
it was
always knew?
no, and then it was not.
Oh no.
Yeah, I mean, I spent basically 13 years of my life in the military,
Oh
and
wow.
and then the realization I was like, I don't fit in this environment. um, like I still love the military, everything that it's provided for me, but it just wasn't the environment that I actually, fit into best. So, um, but yeah,
Yeah,
I
just, oh, sorry, what were you going to say?
oh, I said I completely understand like that, the lack of mentorship when we're younger, I think is a very, very common thing for many people.
Hmm.
And then uh so once you'd made the decision into psychology, you said that you were starting to get exposed to research, and did you get to have more mentors at that point in time, because now all your classes are going to start being more psychology based and research based, right?
Hmm. It's interesting because even at that point, it's like, I guess, like, I did have mentors within the labs that I was working in, but I guess the mentors didn't necessarily fall into my lap. Because, like, once I did start taking the psychology courses, I was like, I love this. I got to get into this 100%. And I actually, like, emailed professors on my own. I went to their, like, professor pages on the, like, Georgia State Psychology website. And I was like, I read their bios and their research interests, and I was like, I like that. So I just emailed them and I was like, hey, can I work for you for free as a research assistant? So it's like, once I started like getting into those two research labs that I was in, there were professors within that department that did definitely take on a mentorship role to the research assistants in the labs. But again, it wasn't like, I guess, like, outside of that, like, the professors weren't like, let me mentor you, but I guess that's not the case anyway. But it's just, I guess I felt like I kind of had to make that happen for myself, um, in terms of like securing a mentor within psychology. Um, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the is that very common in if you were a psychology major to go into the research side and work on different, I guess, research? Because I remember I had a roommate in college too, sophomore year, and he was a psychology major, and he was talking about, it's like, my name's gonna be on this paper, right?
Yeah.
So it seems common. Is that super common for psychology majors? Does everyone have to do that, or is that unique to you personally and maybe my roommate personally, that there was that intrinsic drive to go for the research side?
And that's a really good question because as a psychology major, it's like, I'm just speaking from my personal experiences. Like, as a psych major, it's like, if you want to be a psychologist, which I did at the time, the main paths that you take to get to that level is to either do a PhD, a master's in like counseling psychology, or a I think you can go into social work as well, but those are the three main buckets. And in order to get into those programs, you usually do have to have like research experience. So I think a lot of psychology majors are like, these are my three main paths. This is what I have to do, especially for a PhD in clinical psychology. That is one of the most competitive graduate programs, like, of any fields. It's incredibly competitive, and you really have to like do a lot of things to set yourself apart. So a lot of people do go into research, and they do take on like multiple research labs, which I did at the time because I was like, this is where I need to be. This is what I want to do. And then I was like, I don't want to do a PhD at this point. Um, so I feel like that the fact that those are kind of like the three major career fields that psychology students are often fed, I think that does drive a lot of students to like do research. It certainly drove me. So,
That makes a lot of sense now.
hmm,
I was always
yeah.
curious why all the psychology majors were on some sort of research project because
Yeah.
I was a business major. I wanted to be in the military, so I could really do any major. So
Mhm.
I never had the experience of doing research during the college time frame. So, and then for you, once you started doing the research, is that when you bumped into the user experience research as well? Is that related to psychology, or did you discover that a little bit later?
I discovered that like kind of a lot later, probably like 3 years ago.
Oh, okay.
And that's how, yeah, it's like that's kind of one of the reasons I was excited to do this interview because I'm like, I want to tell people as much as I can about this field because it is so cool and I wish I knew about it sooner. Um, but I'm sorry, what was your original question? I went off on a tangent.
Oh, mine was how did you bump into it? But now that I know you discovered it about 3 years ago, we'll get there.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
from school, then you finished school. Were you thinking of going to graduate school afterwards, or was that not in the cards? Did you immediately start a job following college with a psychology major, or what was the journey after that?
Yeah. So when I graduated from college, I had all of this research experience. And at the time, I had a vision for my life that I was going to be a mental health counselor, that I was going to be working with people with like pretty acute mental illnesses, because I was like, that would be absolutely fascinating to me. And I just want to help people. And so when I graduated from college, I had all this research experience, and I was like, it's great I have this, but I feel like I don't have the applied experience to be like, this is the field that I want to go into. So when I graduated from college, I actually got a job at a psychiatric hospital where I was working overnight shifts, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, every other Wednesday, but they were night shifts. So it was just like totally threw my life for a loop because I'd never really done that. um, and yeah, I realized, working in that setting that it wasn't what I thought it would be, and that, dealing with or working with people with like a severe mental illnesses was just something that I couldn't see myself doing long term because it is like it's such an important job, and it's just there's a lot of pressure, and I realized at that point that it's not something I could see for myself. So that was kind of another like crisis moment where where I'm like, well, what do I do with my life? It's like I love psychology, but I don't know if I want to work directly with people in that way. Um, so after that, I got a job as like a research project manager at this like large academic institution in Atlanta, and I worked there for a little while as well, and I was like, okay, so I think I like working in healthcare. I enjoy aspects of project management. I love working with people in a research capacity. But even at that point, I still didn't know about UX research. But I was like, these are some things that I think I enjoy. So I think I can run with this. And to be quite honest too, it's like if I were to go to grad school, it's like I knew I wanted to study in a field that could, provide the lifestyle that I wanted, that could be like lucrative, but also like working in the field that I want, which was healthcare at the time. So after working as a project manager for research, I ended up enrolling in grad school at the University of Georgia in their dual MBA and PH program, which is Masters of Public Health and Masters of Business Administration, because it kind of, at the time, it accomplished all of my goals. I'm like, okay, so I'll get an MBA. So it's like I can lead people, I can lead teams. This could be great. And then pairing it with the MPH, which would set me up to work in healthcare. Um, I was like, this is it. So I ended up going to grad school. It's a 3-year program. And even throughout my first 2 years of graduate school, I worked as a graduate research assistant, where again, it's like, I feel like throughout my life, I've just been like redirected back to research, which has been really fascinating to me. But yeah, so the first 2 years I was a graduate research assistant. And then my last year, I just worked like with my MBA program, but I was able to get like my graduate school covered financially, which was really helpful to me. Um, and then I ended up like getting a job after grad school that kind of was also really interesting, but we can talk about that later.
How were you able to get the graduate school paid for? Was it your job, you said? Could you clarify?
Yes, absolutely. So when you get into a graduate program, basically what I did is similar to what I did in undergrad. I contacted professors who were at that college and I was like, hey, do you need a research assistant? I have a lot of research experience, hire me. And through that, you're able to get, if you're chosen for that position, like you get your tuition waived, then you get like a monthly living stipend, which was kind of enough to subsist me through graduate school. So I got lucky, but I think I'm just kind of a persistent person where I'm like, hey, this is the way. I know I want to go to grad school. I know I want to get my graduate degree. This is the way I can do it. So I just kind of get very headstrong on certain things, but I think in certain situations that's really important because if I wasn't that way, I probably wouldn't have had that opportunity.
Yeah, that's really great to know. I didn't know that a lot of different research programs and things like that will help pay for graduate school. Is that something unique to the University of Georgia? Was it that you were
Mhm.
saying? Is that unique to that school, or is that fairly universal?
From my understanding, like if it's a large research institution, it's fairly universal. Because I applied to like several programs, and I think the other programs also had like assistantships, but they were like taken by other people already. So I think it is universal, and I think it could be pretty competitive. But if you kind of like advocate for yourself, you can kind of swing one. Um,
Okay, yeah,
yeah, I
that's
feel
really
very lucky that I had it though.
hmm yeah. I think that's a really great insight into how people afford graduate school. Actually, I've always been kind of curious about that
Yeah,
myself. Like, how does everyone go to grad school sometimes? So,
it's
and they pay for
expensive.
both the MBA and the public health. Do you,
Yeah. Mhm.
do,
Oh, go ahead.
would you have been able to do that even if you were just a pure MBA program?
So I I want to say I'm not quite sure. I know my program, the MBA program, does have a lot of resources for students as well, but I'm not quite sure about like the entire program. Because the way the program was structured is like you spend like a year and a half within each of the programs. And then yeah, I'm not as familiar with the MBA resources, but basically it's like since I only spent like a year and a half in the MBA program, I don't know what it's like for just a traditional MBA. But I think they do have like a lot of resources, or so I've heard.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
no worries.
it's
So
a
then once
great
you grad,
program though.
yeah, it really does sound like it. Um, Once you graduated, then you said what was the next part of your journey?
So I knew I wanted to be in California, particularly San Francisco, because my sister was here, and I've always lived in the Southeast, so I was like, it's time to try something new. So I was targeting positions like almost exclusively within the Bay Area, and I ended up getting a role within a leadership development program at Blue Shield of California. Um, and leadership development programs are actually pretty cool for people who are kind of ambivalent about what career path to proceed in. Because again, like when I graduated from grad school, it was another one of those moments where I'm like, what am I doing with my life? I have these degrees, I've proved that I'm competent, but it's like, what now? Um, so I ended up getting a role at Blue Shield of California in their leadership development program, which is a 2-year program where you do 4 6-month rotations in different business units, like throughout the organization. So you can kind of get a feel of what you like, which I think is really cool. Looking back on it, I'm really happy that I did that. So the first, the first rotation was like in, um, I can't remember the exact details of it. It was kind of long ago, not that long ago, but I'm just like pandemic years. It's like 5 years ago. But so basically, I did like 2 rotations that were in like, business development and like marketing and customer experience. And then my third was in this like product management type unit, which had like a UX research component to it. Um, and one of my friends within the leadership development program, like did a rotation in that department, and he's like, "Hey, you have all this research experience. Like, why don't you try to like get into that?" And then I interviewed for it, and then I got it, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so exciting! My first exposure to like true UX research." Again, I kept landing back in research. So it was great. And I got a lot of exposure to like UX research, and I was like exposed to like how projects work, how to interact with stakeholders, and it was a lot of fun. And I knew, because since the program was only 2 years, and after that point, you just need to either like find a job external to Blue Shield or like find a job internally. They didn't have like a ton of open roles within UX research at Blue Shield. So I was like, okay, I need to start looking elsewhere. Um, and that's how I found out about like my current company. And I ended up like getting a job there. And it's just like a UX research position. And then I'm like, this is it. It's like I finally like landed in the field where I'm meant to be in. And it just feels like, you know, finally, it's like throughout these years of being kind of ambivalent on what I wanted to do with my life, it's like I finally found something that resonates with me and plays upon my strengths. And it's nice to finally be here.
Yeah, no, that's quite a journey to figure out what you were sort of meant to do in your
Yeah.
career. So, what is like a day to day like then as a UX researcher?
Yeah. So typically, we will get research requests from either like designers or product managers on something they're curious about with the product that they're working on. And so we'll set up an initial meeting with those stakeholders, either the designer or product manager, and then they'll basically give us the rundown of what they're trying to learn. Um, and then we obviously ask questions like what are their assumptions, like what are some of their hypotheses. And then basically with that information, I develop a research plan, which has like the type of people we're trying to recruit, the questions that we're going to ask them, the timeline, and then I deliver that to the stakeholders. And then at that point, it's usually pretty collaborative because I may ask questions that they think could be worded a little bit differently, and then there's a little bit of back and forth to create the research plan like exactly what it should be. Um, and then at that point, we'll like launch a project. But I realize that also happens like over like a week time span. So yeah, so I guess like my day to day usually consists of like developing research plans. Once we gather the data, I'll create like a readout report. So my day usually involves like creating that report. I usually, like have meetings with different stakeholders, but that's usually how it goes. It's pretty cool.
When you go about, you said recruiting testers, are there, different pools that you can already select for them, or is that, do you have to cold call people to just volunteer, or how does that process look?
Yeah, so the company I work for, we use this resource software where it basically has like this massive pool of research participants. And then from that, we set specific criteria, and then the system like sends invites to those people, and then they take the eligibility screener, and if they're eligible, they can sign up or take the survey. But I think, yeah, in terms of like recruiting, it's usually handled through that. Um, Although I know some projects, no, I want to say that's pretty much the main method, at least at the company where I am now. Yeah.
Okay. So
Mhm.
not a lot of just calling people randomly to try to detect, but more focused on,
No,
yeah.
but I did that a lot in college though, when I was
Okay.
working in those research labs, and that was a lot of fun.
Okay.
Um, yeah, but not here.
Do you need a lot of technical expertise when it comes to the research that you're doing? And I'm specifically asking because yours is, I think, more in the software side, right? Do you need to know computer science and the software development angle or the topics in order to do the research, or are you able to sort of be more generalized? And just apply research principles on top of what the problems are, the designer or the product manager is trying to solve.
Typically the latter. Um, well, I would say, at least for the type of research that I do, it's completely the latter, where it's like I can have a general knowledge of certain softwares because I know a lot of the designers at my company use Figma. So it's like having a general understanding of how Figma works. That's helpful. But yeah, I think that's what's kind of exciting about UX research too, is like you really don't need to be like a designer or like a computer engineer to like kind of be able to like insert yourself into it. Um, so yeah, I think that was good for me too because I don't have a background in computer engineering. I would not be able to. I don't know. I just think it's yeah. You just kind of have to. I think a general knowledge of how things work is helpful, but like I said, we're mainly working on Figma, so it's like which is a design software that um, a lot of designers use at major companies because it's like the software is basically like I liken it to a Google document where it's like multiple people can be in the Figma file at once doing designs. And you can also like run prototypes through Figma. So basically, like as long as you know how Figma works, it's pretty good.
Okay. What we sort of know your background now on how you became a UX researcher. What's the is there a pattern or trend of how the other UX researchers came to find the profession? Did they know from college? Did they have research backgrounds and then just walked into UX at some point? Is there any general path to UX research?
That's a really good question, and I think that's what makes this field so fascinating is because no one has like I guess a definitive path to get into it. Because some of my current and former coworkers have like come from education and some have come from like studying anthropology. So it's like you can really come from any sort of field. It's just as long as you I mean I will say the research background that I had, I think that helped me. Um but it's like I don't think it's absolutely necessary. Because like some people, like I mentioned, they come from like totally different fields and then they end up getting like either a certification program in UX research, which there are a lot of really good ones that can kind of get your foot in the door. Um, but yeah, it's like most of people who end up in UX research, at least from what I've experienced, are like just coming from totally different fields. But they do have that sort of certification to kind of get their foot in the door, like I said.
Hmm. You mentioned education and anthropology. They both sort of have a common thread, even with your psychology background, right? They impact sort of people in
Hmm.
some way. Like educators, they go through sort of childhood development, understanding how people learn and things like that. So there's like a psychology component to it.
Right.
Anthropology, I'm sure there's also something there. Um, so I can kind of see the thread of how everyone sort of congregated around UX. Is there someone who came from like left field, that might not have been in
Ooh.
this arena? Um,
Ooh. I know one of my coworkers, um, he worked in sales for a while, but again, it kind of has that psychological aspect of like working with people, um, and like understanding how people make decisions. Trying to think. Yeah, it's like anthropology. Um, that's actually a good point. It's like a lot of people do come from like kind of like social sciences type fields, and I think that is helpful.
yeah,
Um, yeah, good point.
yeah, but now I'm thinking a little bit too much into it and thinking that basically everything is psychology, though, even on a business end. So
Yes, I like the
yeah,
sound of that.
so it all sort of comes together. I mean, we're all people, so.
Yep.
Um, And what's the career path like now, right? Now that you're in the UX field, uh, is there a trajectory, of
Hmm.
if someone was in the business career, right, like they can generally go, okay, if I'm a marketer at the lowest level in a company, my target goal could be CMO at the very, very top, like chief marketing officer, or maybe something in between, right? There's this ladder that they can see. Does the UX researcher have sort of that career ladder?
Hmm. Yeah, so I will say in a lot of organizations, UX research typically falls under product. So it's like, I think, although maybe within my organization it falls under marketing, I can't quite remember the exact structure. Um, but yeah, typically it's like you can either go the individual contributor route, which I think goes to like principal level, which is like the highest level of UX researcher, or you could go management. So it's like I'm like a UX researcher currently. So it's like if I were to continue to go up, it would be like senior researcher, lead manager, and then like, all the way up to like director and like executive director level, I think. So that's my understanding of like how the hierarchy works. But yeah, it's UX research typically falls under like product or marketing. And then I guess hypothetically, if you were to continue to go up, you could go as far as those levels.
Just curious before we move on to how someone might be able to become a UX researcher, is there
Mhm.
anything else in your day to day that is unique perhaps to the profession? Um, like, is there any other, I guess, similar? Right now, it's in the software side, right? Is that usually the same across every single company, your day to day, working with stakeholders and identifying the research questions and then formulating a plan around it? Is that the general framework, or could there be some other experience that a UX researcher might have in a different company?
Hmm. I think as far as my understanding, this is kind of like the general structure of how things work. Yeah, I guess it does depend on like the type of research too, because I guess if yeah, and it's like all the research I've done is also remote. Um, I think those are like the general things that people do within research though. Yeah, it's like project management, figuring out the right research strategy, um, managing expectations. Yeah, I think it's just kind of that general path.
Okay, yeah, that
Hmm.
makes sense. The If there were any students interested in this field, do you think that there is a more direct path? I know that you sort of talked about how everyone comes from a different background. Are there
Hmm.
more direct ways to get into this career path?
Yes, absolutely. And I wish I would have known about these paths sooner, honestly. But a lot of programs are starting to offer like undergrad degrees in like human computer interaction, I think. Um, I know there are like master's level courses you can take. A lot like some of my coworkers went at the University of Washington to get their master's. Um, but yeah, I think that's probably the most direct route. And I don't know if they even had like undergraduate human computer interaction courses like when I was an undergrad. But I think universities have started to offer that. So I guess if someone was in high school and decided that this is the field that they want to go into, there are opportunities for that. Like definitely, especially at colleges that have like a large like design or engineering presence. I know like Washington, Georgia Tech. Although I need to do more research on that research. But I don't know if they offer like an undergraduate course in HCI. But yeah, that would probably be the most like direct path to get into this field. Um, and then additionally, like if you do have an undergrad and like something unrelated and you decide you want to do this, like you could get a master's in HCI, human computer interaction.
Okay, you were able to get into uh, the career field because of your research backgrounds. It's sort of
Hmm.
a very easier transition, maybe not easy, uh, but easier transition into that field. If there were someone like mid career who's interested in potentially going over to the UX researcher side, is that possible, or do you think that they would have to go through, uh, an educational process to prove out that hey, I do have some research foundation, right? And I'm
Hmm.
kind of thinking jobs where, let's say, they were in business or maybe even blue collar. But do how do you think it's possible to get to the UX researcher side mid career, and also how?
Hmm. I think it is possible. Um, I think it depends. I mean, it depends on the field, but it's like, I think networking is often a really powerful tool because research and like the principles of like executing a project successfully, there's so many transferable skills from other fields that can be like brought into research. So I don't think it's absolutely like hopeless that someone, in a totally different field could get into it. It's just a lot of it I'd imagine would have to do for like with like advocating for yourself and networking. Um, and that is like if you don't want to take a certification course. Because I found that like informational interviewing is a really powerful tool. Even kind of like this, but it's just like reaching out to people on LinkedIn who like work at the companies you want to work at and have the roles that you want to work at. Um, I found that that's a really powerful tool of networking, just kind of like setting up informational interviews and coming in with like an attitude of like curiosity and like, I want to learn from your experiences. Tell me. Um, but again, it can be kind of daunting. I know just speaking from personal experience, it's kind of hard to kind of, you know, start doing that on LinkedIn. But I think that's a really good tool. It's just like networking through LinkedIn, seeing who other people know. That's a really powerful tool. And then just being able to like kind of like weave your own story into like a sort of a UX research type position role. Like when you are like introducing yourself. Um, And then additionally, there are like certification courses, like if, networking isn't as much your thing, like you could do a certification. There are a lot that are really good. One of which I didn't do, but one of my old coworkers did, is the Nielsen Norman research certification. That's a really good one. I know Coursera has one. I think Google has one as well. But there are resources as well, like if that you could tack one in addition to networking that could kind of get your foot in the door. But honestly, like networking is pretty major.
Yeah, I love that you brought up networking because I
Hmm.
think a lot of people, when they're looking for jobs and careers, they're not necessarily doing outreach to just talk to people. They may see a job profile and then they just try to apply. And then if you don't meet the credentials, it's sort of just easily overlooked during that, application process. So I
Hmm.
love that you brought up the uh, the the networking component to it to humanize yourself in a way.
Totally.
Um, do you think that there's a specific type of personality type that might gravitate well to the UX researcher side, or have you found a trend? Um, do you have any recommendations of like, hey, if you like doing X, Y, Z, maybe to consider this profession?
You know, it's funny because I will say, like, I guess speaking from my own experience, kind of being more on the introverted side, and I've always been like a really good listener too. And I know that's kind of hard to talk about in like a job situation, just coming in and being like, I'm a good listener. Um, but I think that is a really important skill. It's just like good listening skills, empathy, being able to like put yourself in someone's shoes. That's kind of the characteristics that I've run into a lot in this field. Um, I guess I don't, yeah, I'm like trying to think of like something that wouldn't, or someone that wouldn't thrive in this field. Um, I mean, I guess it's also good to have kind of like an innate curiosity about like how people work. I think that's really helpful, and to be humble and like always willing to learn. Um, I think those are also important skills, but I feel like that's in a lot of different fields, and not necessarily unique to UX research. So yeah, I guess just kind of people who are usually introspective and just curious are people that tend to thrive in this field.
Yeah. Are there types of people that you would like to recruit into that field just because it gels well with your personality type?
It's funny you mention that though, because like ever since I've gotten into this field, it's like I feel like I've found my people, or people that I relate to the most, because we are just like very curious, and it's like that's another indicator that I think I found my right field. Is like I feel like I can really relate to a lot of people in UX research. But yeah, I'm always trying to get people in it though. But it's just like having those skills would is definitely helpful, for having that sort of personality of like curious and um, self starter. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we've taken a lot of your time. Do you have any last advice that you'd like to impart on the audience? And remember, these are people who are probably just curious about different careers and
Hmm.
maybe thinking about what job should I have. So, really, any type of advice, whether it's specifically for UX research, career path, or just generically.
Hmm. Yeah. So I think one thing that I wish was normalized a little bit more was that it's okay to not be 100% sure with what you want to do with the rest of your life. Because I think early on in my career, especially, I felt a lot of pressure to have it figured out. Um, but it's like in applying that pressure to myself, it's like I wasn't as, I guess, introspective as I could have. Like, I feel like I could have gotten into UX research a lot quicker if I hadn't been putting as much pressure on myself to like figure it out, you know? So I think it's like, I think we should normalize being unsure, and that it's okay to be unsure, and that where you're meant to be will find you eventually and you will find it. And all of that time of being unsure will be well worth it. Um, yeah, that's just something I wish someone had told me.
And I really, really like that piece of advice too, because one of the reasons I'm doing this is because I'm unsure myself. So,
Yeah, and that's okay.
yeah, and I'm having a really, really good time just listening to other people's careers and hearing their stories to be inspired by them. If anyone's interested about your, you know, the career path or just anything in general, how could they reach you?
Yeah, so you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, just my full name, Nikki Fillingim. Or if you want to reach out to me via email as well, feel free to do that at which is the letter of my first name, Fillingim, Fillingim, the number two at gmail.com. I'm happy to chat with anyone who's curious about it.
Great. Yeah.
Mhm.
And as always, if anyone's interested in communicating with any of our guests, past one or Nikki, you can also contact us at Nikki or info at mentoraccess.com. And we'll make sure to put all of Nikki's information in the description of all of the channels that we have, from YouTube to, you know, Spotify to iTunes. We'll have it all. So, thank you so much for joining us, Nikki, and telling
Yeah.
your story.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is really fun, and I'm really excited to see, the outcome of all of this. I think this is great.
Hey, thanks for joining us at Mentor Access. If you like what you just watched, please click like and subscribe, and also hit that bell so that you get notified when we have new videos come out. Thank you for supporting our mission.